America, let's get right into Trump's talk about privatizing USPS. On Monday, Trump talked about, he's eyeing privatizing USPS and is with his friends Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy running Doge. The arguments are going to come that we can privatize this service. It'll be more efficient. Elon's going to push for electric post vehicles, and your Tesla stocks are going to shoot up with that big government contract he's going to secure. And it's just going to make sense to privatize privatize USPS, because we don't actually know what USPS is for. We don't know what since we don't know what USPS is for, we do what we do with most things we don't know what it's for, try to create metrics that may or may not line up to the mission of the system, and then grade that system on those metrics. We did the same thing in education. We don't know what it's for, so we create metrics out of nowhere and then grade education on those metrics. And we need to understand that USPS, is it a service or is it a jobs program? Now, it disproportionately hires black workers, and I think it's the highest industry, with a stunning high 30% of mail carriers or sorters are black. It's in the high 30s. It's a black job. So all those people who didn't know what black jobs were, USPS is a black job. 40% of postal clerks and 38% of postal service mail sorters, processors, and processing machine operators are black. And we are not evenly dispersed among all occupations, right? This chart says 12.6% of all occupations, and we are 40% of the postal clerks. So it is a black job that's thinking about Trump's thinking about privatizing. And when he privatizes it, you have to understand black people do not fare so well on the private market. That's one of the reasons why we are kind of corralled into the postal service and other government jobs. And we need to understand, is the postal service a service or is it a jobs program? If it's a jobs program, we need to talk about where those people are going to go who depend on the postal service for a job. And also we need to talk about what jobs mean in American life and how you can be or you can or can't be a citizen, a functional citizen, without access to a good, secure job, because that's what a good government job promises black people, a secure lifestyle so that they can be Americans in other ways, right? So if it's a jobs program, we have to talk about why we need jobs programs to begin with, and what it means that the jobs program, unlike, say, the stimulus that went to the private sector hires, what it means for the government to run a jobs program that is the postal service that disproportionately attracts black people, because black people are shunned out of the private market because we don't have the capital, we don't have the connections, and a few hundred years of Jim Crow and stigma doesn't help either, and what that's done to our families. So for a lot of reasons, we are unfairly stigmatized and unduly stigmatized in the private labor market. And so we need good government union jobs in order to actually access our other ways of being free in America. Because if you don't have a good job, you can't really do much else. Or if you don't have access to steady income and capital, you can't really do much else. So if the USPS is actually a jobs program for black people, then we need to talk about why black people need a jobs program, or why Americans need jobs in general. Now, if the USPS is a service, then we need to talk about something else. We need to talk about maybe it's okay for it to be privatized if it's a service that can be run more efficiently. Then maybe it's okay to be privatized. But if it's a service, we have to think about what other services, and this is a big question, so lean in real close, people. This is why you pay the $5, $15, or $50 a month. If it's a service, we have to think, what are we doing when we give that service infrastructure over to private operators? And what we're doing is foreclosing the possibility of future services coming out of that infrastructure, right? You're foreclosing the possibility of postal banking, which might be, I think, in this world where you need access to a bank in a way that maybe you didn't, and you need access to a bank with certain yeah, you need access to a national bank just for both convenience and for just life. And the for-profit banks tend to be a little bit usurious if you are at the minimum. So the idea of a postal bank actually might be another figure in democracy, that the postal infrastructure is already set up to provide. Mercer Baradaran wrote a book, How the Other Half Banks. Mercer Baradaran, she's pretty smart. I don't agree with all of her takes on all the things, but she wrote one of the best and most accessible books on reparations called The Color of Money. And her book, How the Other Half Banks, has a pretty solid argument for postal banking. So you foreclose that infrastructure if you privatize USPS. So it's not just the postal service that goes away as a public entity if you privatize it. The postal service infrastructure as an infrastructure that can allow for other public goods goes away. You set up another barrier for a more robust use of the postal service. And that, I think, is a problem. And we don't think about that when we just privatize things and then are surprised when the profit motive forecloses other options for democracy. So if you're serious about the postal service as a service, privatizing it might actually screw up its service capacities if we move that service to include other things that democracy might want, like postal banking. Right? So if you think of the Postal Service as a jobs program for Black people and you privatize it, you have to think about what that means for Black people who need to work and what jobs mean in general. And we need another jobs program, and it can't be privatized because of the way the private market stigmatizes Black participation. And if you think about, so you need another public jobs program. You need a public jobs program with good unionized jobs, federal jobs, right? So you need another federal jobs program. And I'm in favor of a federal jobs guarantee. So that's right up my alley. But if you think about the Postal Service as a jobs program, you need to think about a replacement jobs program for all the people who are going to be put out of the work, who are disproportionately Black. You can't just throw them to the private market. You're throwing chum in the water. They will get chewed up and spat out. That's why you have to ask yourself, why have they kind of settled in postal work to begin with? What does that mean about in government? What does that mean about that job and also government work in general for Black life to begin with? And what does that mean about the private market for Black life? And maybe it doesn't operate the same. Studies will show that it doesn't. By the way, if you appreciate this private market, the good and service I'm giving you, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademic.com and kick in $5, $15, or $50. 'Tis the season, people. And my kids need gifts. And, I got to keep all of this going. And I'm trying to give you a quality of wisdom that'll help you make sense of your life in these times of woe and want, which I think you're going to need. Because if you go at the Republicans in the wrong way, it's not great. Another reason you have to be careful when you criticize Trump privatizing USPS is that Trump won without us. He won without Black people. This is what happens when you're captured by a single party and you have no juice with the other party. Trump could invite a Klan head to his meeting and it might be fine. He might that he won without Black people. And when Black people hate Trump out of a priori reasons, just because they feel like hating Trump, that doesn't mean that he's going to lose. His base has an interest in keeping Black people subordinate, and they're still going to vote for him. And he won the popular vote so there's more of them than there are of us. So we need to understand that just trying to shame Trump for doing something that's obviously bad to Black people is not necessarily bad for Republicans. Right. So privatizing, once you privatize USPS, you're going to look at differential rates for driving way out in rural Louisiana or rural Alaska. You're going to look, there are some things where efficiency doesn't matter. Like, we don't talk about the revenue neutral military. We talk about a military that's budgeted enough to do the job it's supposed to do. And that's the way we should talk about public services, so that they're budgeted enough to do the job they're supposed to do. And as long as you can show that it won't lead to inflation, then spend the money. Spend the money, secure people jobs. Right? So if you're saying that the Postal Service paying those black postal workers is somehow leading to inflation, then yeah, we could talk about cutting that job. But if it's not, and it's providing a service, then pay people to do the service. Pay people to do the service and secure that service in all parts of America. Right? It's some people's most positive relationship with the federal government is seeing their postal man every day like work for them, is being able to put something in the mail and 2 days later it arrive like in New York. I still think it's magic. I think the angels carry it, but it turns out the angels are Negroes. So yeah, I used to think the angels just kind of went into the post box and then 2 days later it ends up in Montana. I find that remarkable. That is not the angels, it's Negroes, it's us. So I want you to think about three things when you hear about these privatizing the postal service in America. One, it disproportionately affects black people, but Trump won without black people, which means that he could do whatever he wants to us and still win because his base likes keeping black people subordinate. And explicitly so, whereas the Democrats like keeping black people subordinate implicitly so. And if you think I'm wrong, go to California. It's not like black people are winning and not the Democrats all the way down, up and down. So, one, there's that. Two, think about what the Postal Service means. Is it a service? And if it's a service, if we privatize it, what other services are we foreclosing? For example, postal banking. And if it's not a service, if it's a jobs program, when we privatize it and throw those black people onto the private market, when those people have to reapply for their jobs and then get cut when Elon Musk takes over the Postal Service, what does that mean for the citizenship of those postal workers? And what do jobs mean for citizenship? And that should be maybe I'll do that as another show. What do jobs mean for citizenship? Because in order to be a citizen in the United States, a functional citizen, you need to have access to a good job. Lincoln knew this, except he thought in order to be a citizen in the United States, you need to have access to like land and property and have your own business. This is why this is the Lincoln of the Homestead Acts and all of that stuff. Like this, the conditions of citizenship are rather muscular. And we just think about it just being the vote, but you need other forms of recognition in order to actually, for your vote to mean something, for your political power to mean something. And one of them is you need, to be able to participate in civil society. So you're not dependent and you go to the government as a particular client. Instead, you go to the government as like a participant in government because you're independently, civilly, have good standing, right? So you need a job in order to be a real American. You need access to a good job. And that means where you have a fair say in your working conditions or you work for yourself, something like that, in order to be a good American. So I'm going to do a show on what kind of jobs you need in order to be a citizen. And number three, we need to ask ourselves, why didn't the National Association of Black Journalists ask Trump about this kind of stuff instead of their nonsense? Like, what kind of black lobbies do we have that doesn't actually talk like I'm talking? These are arguments you should have heard before. If this is the first time you've heard it, go ahead and go to www.funkyacademics.com and kick in $5, $15, $50 a month. But also, if this is the first time you've heard it, these kinds of arguments, what are our national black journalists doing? What's our CBC doing? Right? And you have to get these arguments clear, because if you go to to the public square and argue for the USPS as a jobs program for black people, all of those people who think that they are paying for a postal service are going to say, screw them Negroes. Like, you can't just say you have to have, you have to have the USPS because a lot of black people work there. To people who think that the USPS is supposed to actually deliver mail, they're going to say like, no, well, that sounds like a black people problem. I have a postal service problem, and since the postal service program is not a jobs program for black people, it's supposed to deliver mail, I'm going to try to deliver mail in the most efficient way as possible. Right? And that they're going to be in their right to say that if you go at them with the postal service being a black jobs program. So you need to get your arguments clear if you're going to advocate for postal service. For those kind of people, you have to say if you privatize the postal service, you're foreclosing future public goods we can get out of that service infrastructure, including postal banking. And it's good to have a national infrastructure that's publicly run and it's publicly domain national service infrastructure, because maybe we want postal wellness checks. And maybe the USPN, the USPS becomes a place where wellness checks happen. Well, where wellness checks are dispatched and people go door to door to make sure that like the olders are not just dying in their home. I'm going to say for the next 10 years, we're going to be finding people just dying in their home in their small town. And, their bills are on auto pay and they're going to be dead for 2 weeks. What happens if postal service, if the ride-alongs with social workers, and that's part of the postal service experience? Do you really want to foreclose that infrastructure? So you foreclose that infrastructure when you privatize the postal service, because they're going to like be cutting offices and then decide their own cost-cutting measures, which is going to eviscerate and hollow out the infrastructure, the administrative infrastructure. So you have to talk about in terms of what privatizing the service does for servicing the United States. Or if you want to talk about black jobs, it's a black jobs program and a racial justice thing. We need to talk about why the private labor market is unsuitable for black people in 2024 and what jobs mean. So we need to talk about another public jobs program for black people that will secure good jobs for black people. But these are two different conversations. And if you conflate the conversations, you'll just get a lot of people who say like, well, I'll take the public service, I'll take the private USPS, and the black people are on their own. The blacks are on their own. You're welcome for the ideological clarity I'm providing for you this afternoon. And I will talk to you about something different at another time. But please, I don't want to have to put some of this behind paywall and run that kind of operation. But that depends on you going to www.funkyacademic.com and kicking in $5, $15, or $50 a month at your discretion. Or you can make a one-time enormous donation, which is nice this season. Or you can sign up for my Patreon if you want to do that. But thank you for your time. I'm going to come at you with something else probably later this week. And I will talk to you anon.